March 15th, 1889. Room 237, Belmont Hotel, Newport, Rhode Island. The curtains were drawn, the champagne untouched, and on the desk, a letter with no signature. Its final words, "They will erase me. If you're reading this, they already have." This wasn't just a missing person. This was a redaction, a surgical removal from memory, a woman of power and poise, erased from the official record like she never existed. And yet for decades, whispers remained. Secrets refused to stay buried. Because the name Isabella Fairmont was once spoken in the same breath as queens, steel barons, and senators, until she vanished. But no one disappears alone. Behind Isabella's fall was a machine, not of gears and pistons, but of influence. Families so powerful they operated like dynasties, institutions that turned scandal into strategy, and a society that fed on its own with teeth made of gold and law. The truth is not that Isabella was lost, but that she knew too much. This story isn't about love, it's about leverage. And if you think this only concerns the past, you're already too deep. Because what happened to Isabella Fairmont was not unique. It was a template, a ritual sacrifice wrapped in silk and champagne, a trial run for something darker. Every powerful institution tests its methods. Some use wars, others use women. She was beautiful, educated, connected, and worst of all, she was aware. That's why this story matters now. Because the very families who buried her truth didn't die with the Gilded Age. They changed their names, they built think tanks, they sat on foundation boards and rewrote the rules you follow every day without realizing they were written to keep you compliant, docile, blind. Tonight, we'll tear those rules apart, one revelation at a time. And by the end, you won't just know what happened to Isabella Fairmont. You'll know why she had to vanish, and who still benefits from her silence. You ready? Then don't blink. Newport in 1881 wasn't just a seaside resort. It was a fortress of reputations, an arena where every smile was a weapon and every whisper could start a war. Along Bellevue Avenue, cottages with 70 rooms loomed like marble fortresses, each more grandiose than the last. These were not homes. They were trophies, symbols of industrial empires that mined coal, forged steel, and controlled railroads stretching like veins across the continent. In this world, Isabella Fairmont was a queen without a crown. Born Isabella Catherine Aldridge, her lineage wove Boston's oldest bloodlines together with the kind of aggressive new money that crushed competitors without mercy. By 22, she had mastered the art of the Newport summer, galas with orchestras from Vienna, dinners where senators traded favors like playing cards, and charities that functioned less to help the poor than to polish the image of those who controlled them. But Isabella wasn't content with mere performance. She wanted knowledge. In private, she asked questions her peers considered dangerous. Where did the money really come from? What unspoken agreements kept the robber barons' feuds from destroying them all? Who paid the Pinkertons to silence miners, and why did the newspapers print identical stories the next morning? At first, her curiosity made her fascinating. Then, it made her frightening. Because every game has a boundary. Isabella stepped over it when she began to collect answers, and worse, document them. Her correspondence with shipping magnates revealed coded references to illegal monopolies. Her diaries recorded conversations with senators who bragged of foreign bribes. By 1883, she had pieced together a network of secrets stretching from Pennsylvania steel mills to Manhattan banks. But truth, like power, demands a price. In this gilded jungle, information was currency deadlier than gold. And they'll sing. Isabella was becoming rich in a way that couldn't be flaunted at a ball. Rumors swirled among servants. who carried tales between mansions faster than telegraphs. The whispers grew legs, sprouted wings. By the time Isabella first met Jonathan Pembroke, she was already marked, admired by many, feared by more. Tonight, you'll hear what those servants dared not repeat above a whisper. Because Isabella's story isn't a tragedy, it's a warning. And if you think you're safe because you don't live in a marble mansion, you haven't been paying attention. He arrived in silence. No fanfare, no lineage to boast, just an invitation, handwritten, to oversee a renovation at Trinity Church. That's how Jonathan Pembroke entered Newport's bloodstream, not as a guest, as a virus. Tall, angular, dressed in English-tailored suits that clashed with his poverty, he possessed the one trait that Newport's elite had no immunity against: mystery. He spoke 5 languages, but used few words, had designed mansions in Pittsburgh, Richmond, and Charleston, each for a woman who would later vanish from public life. No one asked why, and that's how he passed their test. Isabella met him over architectural blueprints and candlelight. Her committee had requested alterations to Trinity's nave, more capacity, better acoustics. Pembroke suggested stained glass installations that told stories only certain eyes would recognize. Eden, Babel, the fall of princes. But it wasn't the windows he came to build. He came for her. They say their eyes met across the conference table. That time slowed. That for a moment even the clocks in Trinity stopped ticking. What began as consultation became conspiracy. Within weeks, he was arriving at Rosecliff under the pretense of measuring walls, inspecting beams. But what he was really doing was learning her rhythms, her doubts, her secrets, and feeding her new ones. Isabella, once the master of masks, began to forget hers. Her laugh changed, her gaze lingered too long, and at night, in her private study, she poured wine over stolen blueprints, blueprints that showed more than just architecture. Hidden rooms, sliding panels, entire wings unaccounted for in any public record. Pembroke claimed the rich wanted more than just opulence. They wanted insulation from the law, from scandal, from the truth. And he had built it for them, brick by brick. He told Isabella stories about what lay behind those false walls, ledgers, documents, letters sealed in wax and blood. She listened, and for the first time in years, she believed someone understood her. But here's the secret no one told her. Men like Pembroke aren't born. They're placed, dropped into proximity like a match near gasoline. His charm wasn't affection. It was design. Because a woman like Isabella didn't need to be assassinated, she needed to be led. Right into the trap. You don't fall from grace in Newport. You're pushed. The first sign is silence, fewer invitations, less ink in the society columns. Then come the accidental exclusions. The parties you once hosted now held elsewhere, with your name conspicuously absent from the guest list. But it all starts with the whispers. And in the summer of 1884, the whispers about Isabella Fairmont weren't just spreading. They were engineered. By whom? That's the question Newport never asked. Because high society wasn't just social, it was surveillance. Servants were informants. Editors were bought. Private detectives operated under church sponsorship. When Isabella dared to challenge the social order by loving someone unvetted, unblooded, and unknown, the order responded. It began with Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's maid, who claimed she saw Isabella in the conservatory. Not alone. Then, the casino sightings. Isabella and Pembroke. Too close. Too frequent. The damning detail came from a studio assistant. A letter, unopened, addressed to Isabella in Pembroke's own hand. All circumstantial. All devastating. But these weren't accidents. They were leaks. Scripted. Timed. By autumn, A name once synonymous with refinement had become a punchline whispered behind fans and fluted glasses. The press followed, like vultures who'd been waiting. The New York Herald called her Newport's fallen angel. The piece was unsigned, but the information it contained, bank transfers, jewelry sold, art missing, could have only come from someone inside her home. Betrayal wasn't just social, it was domestic. And here's what they don't print in the papers. Isabella had begun to talk, not just to Pembroke, but to others. A banker's widow, a disillusioned secretary. She was collecting stories, names, patterns. She had begun to sketch the outline of something larger than scandal, a map of corruption, disguised as inheritance. That's why they didn't just shame her, they isolated her. Not to punish, to remove her from the game board before she figured out who the players really were. Newport society didn't fear affairs. Affairs could be buried. What they feared was a woman with influence and intent. And that's exactly what Isabella had become. Now hear me carefully, because this is where most men look away. The rich don't mind sin. They mind exposure. October 12th, 1884. The morning paper hit the doorstep like a guillotine. Newport's fallen angel. The headline was elegant, merciless. Beneath it, a column written by an anonymous author known only as Observer. A name used before to dismantle rivals, to shape public opinion, to assassinate reputations without ever firing a bullet. But this piece, this was surgical. It named no source. It needed none. It painted Isabella's downfall with brushstrokes of scandal, financial betrayal, and sexual impropriety. Just enough fact to appear credible, just enough fiction to poison her permanently. It wasn't merely character assassination. It was erasure. They revealed she had gifted Jonathan Pembroke tens of thousands from her personal accounts, that she had sold priceless family heirlooms under the guise of refurnishing. But what they didn't say outright, only implied, was far more insidious, that Isabella wasn't a victim of love. She was a co-conspirator, that she had funded a man with a known pattern, one who used charm the way poisoners use sugar. Theodore Fairmont, her husband, read the article with shaking hands, and when he finished, he did what all powerful men do when their empire is shamed. He launched an investigation, not into the truth, but into containment. Private detectives, all ex-Pinkertons, were dispatched to Pembroke's former cities, Pittsburgh, Richmond, Baltimore, and in every one they found the same signature: a widow, a fortune, a disappearance, sometimes quiet, sometimes violent. Pembroke had not just broken hearts, he'd siphoned legacies. And Isabella, she wasn't his first, just his most dangerous. Because she didn't just fall, she fought. When Theodore confronted her in the library at Rosecliff, she didn't beg, she didn't weep, she confessed, proudly. And when he demanded she return to Boston, renounce Pembroke, and submit to Social rehabilitation, her response chilled the blood of every man in the room. I will not be managed, because that's what it had always been about, hadn't it? Management. Women like Isabella weren't meant to think, to question, to act. She did all three. And Newport, with all its silks and sermons and social rituals, had no defense against that. You think this is history? No. It's a mirror. Because the same machinery is still humming. It just learned to smile while it operates. They say Rosecliff's windows stayed open that winter so no one could hear the screaming. Not from Isabella, from Theodore. Because what haunts powerful men isn't disobedience, it's disgrace. By December 1884, Isabella had effectively become a prisoner inside her own estate. Not in chains, but in reputation. No visitors, no letters, No carriages allowed down Bellevue Avenue without inspection. Rosecliffe's once celebrated halls were reduced to surveillance corridors, and yet, despite everything, she continued to write. Letters, pages, files. What she was assembling piece by piece was a record, not of love, but of systemic rot. She had traced the Pembroke pattern, but beyond him, she had begun tracing others. Clergymen who inherited vast sums after sudden deaths, magistrates whose wives vanished before testifying, even a senator who married his ward after her guardian fell ill. These were not isolated scandals. They were connected movements. And Pembroke? He was just one of the conduits, a charming, well-dressed errand boy for a syndicate of men who traded in two currencies, influence and secrecy. She told no one, except one. Her maid, Annalise, loyal, illiterate, invisible, which made her the perfect courier. Isabella instructed her to deliver a sealed package to a man in Providence, an archivist named Giles Whitlock, a former Jesuit with connections to forbidden records and suppressed documents. She told Annalise, "If I disappear, he will know what to do." But Annalise never made it. 2 blocks from the station, she was pulled into a black carriage. Witnesses heard a struggle. No one intervened. The next morning, her body was found at the cliffs, ruled a suicide. No note, no investigation. The package was gone. And Isabella? She received a note, unsigned, slid under her door. "Stop writing, or you will follow her." Most would have broke. Isabella didn't. She tripled her efforts. But here's where it turns. On January the 8th, 1885, she vanished. Not a trace. No struggle, no farewell. The room was pristine. The bed untouched. Her writing desk cleared, ink still wet. One candle burned down to the wick, as if someone had waited. For hours. The only thing left was a single sheet of paper, torn from her journal. It read, "You cannot bury what was born to expose you." January the 9th, 1885. The staff at Rosecliff was silent. Not because of loyalty, because of fear. They said her dressing gown was still draped across the chair, her silver brush left beside the basin. Tea, untouched, had cooled on the tray. No sign of departure, no hint of violence. And yet, Isabella Fairmont was gone. Within hours, rumors infected the town like mold in silk. Some whispered she fled to Europe under a false name, her fortune stashed in Swiss vaults. Others swore they'd seen her on a steamer to Charleston, veiled and quiet. But behind the parlor games and desperate dinner chatter, the elites knew something darker was at play. Because this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a message. Theodore's reaction? Silence. Not a search. Not a bounty. Not even a public statement. He declared her mentally unwell and unfit for public life. Then locked Rosecliffe's records, burned her correspondences, dismissed the staff. And just like that, the woman who once owned the season ceased to exist, officially. But Newport has always been a town of double walls and hidden chambers, and some secrets leak. A week later, a servant named Malcolm, young, reckless, and doomed, sold a fragment of Isabella's journal to a Boston paper. It was just a paragraph, a single paragraph scrawled in haste, with words slashed as if written in panic. "They wear collars made of law. They kneel to no altar but leverage. He is not the root, he is the blade. The hand that guides him wears rings of inherited guilt. I was not the first. I will not be the last." The paper printed it, quietly, On page 13. 3 days later, Malcolm was dead. Poisoned. Found slumped in a boarding house chair, mouth foaming, eyes wide with terror. They called it bad oysters. No one believed it, but no one questioned it. Because by then, every servant, every clerk, every archivist who had even touched Isabella's world had either vanished, fled, or changed their name. It wasn't just about erasing her, it was about erasing memory itself. And here's the thing no one dares admit. Isabella didn't vanish in 1885. She was erased in stages, not by a man, but by a system, one that still decides who is remembered and who is removed. Years passed, and the name Isabella Fairmont began to shift. Not into history, into myth. In Newport, mothers warned daughters not to be too clever. Debutantes were told, beauty is currency, silence is survival. The Fairmont estate, once the crown jewel of Bellevue Avenue, was shuttered. Vines crept across the marble steps, curtains stayed drawn for decades. But the whispers never stopped, because there were sightings. In 1891, a sailor in Marseille claimed to have ferried a veiled woman with an American accent and a violet birthmark, just like Isabella's, into Tunis. In 1897, a nurse at St. Dymphna's Asylum in Pennsylvania swore a patient admitted under the name Annabel Gray spoke Latin in her sleep and begged for a man named Giles Whitlock. In 1902, a photograph surfaced, poorly developed, grainy, showing a woman behind a barred window in Venice. The resemblance? Startling. But the image vanished from the archive before it could be confirmed. Every lead was buried. Every witness silenced. And yet, the legend kept mutating, because something else was happening beneath the surface. In 1913, Giles Whitlock, the Jesuit archivist Isabella once trusted, resurfaced in Baltimore, not as a scholar, as a founder. He launched a private society known as the Orphans of the Veil. Their stated purpose? To preserve the testimonies of the erased. They were dismissed as eccentrics. Until people noticed what they collected: death certificates with no bodies, court cases with missing pages, journals, fragments, photographs, all from women who vanished between 1860 and 1900. He claimed every one of them had crossed paths with the same handful of men. Men connected to land deeds, to church trusts, to federal appointments. Men who profited from disappearances the same way one profits from war, by controlling the story of what happened. Whitlock swore Isabella had left a map, not geographical but psychological. A breadcrumb trail of signs and patterns. He said she encoded them in the margins of her journals, in letters, even in the choice of words she used in dinner conversations, all recorded by others and stored in estate archives. He believed she knew they would erase her. So she buried clues in the only place they wouldn't look, their own world. Not to escape it, but to expose it. You see, the mistake most people make is thinking Isabella wanted to be found. She didn't. She wanted to be understood, but not by the masses, not by scandal-hungry journalists or society ghouls. She left her trail for a very specific mind. Someone trained to decode silence. Because when they took everything, her name, her voice, her records, all she had left was her pattern. And patterns, once noticed, cannot be unseen. In 1914, a member of Whitlock's Orphans of the Veil infiltrated a closed auction at the Harrington Club in New York, Lot 47, a collection of private correspondences and ledger pages from the late Fairmont estate. The pages were torn, faded, and, on the surface, banal. But there, hidden in the folds of one letter, were 4 words. He controls memory access. The rest of the page was blank. But under heat, invisible ink bloomed. Journal entries dated weeks after Isabella's disappearance. impossible unless she had survived. And she had. But this wasn't about mere survival. She was documenting a system, one made of paper and ritual, one that did not kill outright, but erased through bureaucracy. Asylum intake forms, false diagnoses, marriage registries altered posthumously. One that could make a woman disappear not with violence, but with narrative. Whitlock's group began calling it the Archive. Not a place, a principle. A network of men, judges, priests, financiers, academics, who kept the surface world calm by devouring the inconvenient. Their goal? To control the past. Because when you control what happened, you control what's allowed to happen again. And Isabella had found the seams. Her letters described masked gatherings beneath churches, contracts written in cipher, children trained from birth to manage institutional memory, to destroy files with one hand while writing official history with the other. She called them curators of amnesia. And her trail, if you followed it closely, led not to a grave, but to a locked wing of the Fairmont estate. A wing where the wallpaper hid notes behind its pattern, where the floorboards creaked in sequences, where even the dust told stories when lit from the right angle. She didn't run. She remained. Not to haunt. To witness. And every witness, if left too long, becomes a weapon. In 1921, under the pretense of historical preservation, the Newport Historical Society obtained temporary access to the Fairmont estate. The public believed it was a routine survey. Architectural records, photographs, restoration assessments. But what the surveyors found in the West Wing was not routine. Behind a sealed walnut door, warped from moisture and time, was a parlour untouched since 1879. Dust thick as velvet. Lamps with burned-out wicks. A chair turned slightly, as if someone had just stepped away and never returned. But then they found the mirror. It spanned nearly the entire wall, cracked in 3 places, silvering faded, and etched into the surface, barely visible unless light hit at a slant, was a series of numbers. Not dates, not coordinates. Library classifications. Specific to one branch, the Jesuit archives in Salamanca, Spain. Inside a nearby drawer, hidden beneath old sheet music, was a scorched book cover. No pages, just the spine and a single word pressed into the leather. Vestige. That word would soon become an obsession among certain circles. It appeared again in a private journal from Giles Whitlock, written just before his death in 1923. He claimed Isabella's writings, the true ones, were not destroyed but scattered. Some encoded in paintings, some turned into prayers, others hollowed into nursery rhymes recited by daughters of elite families who never questioned the words they sang. But always signed with that word. Vestige. A remnant. A shadow. A sliver of something the world tried to unremember. One of the surveyors, a woman named Eleanor Rowe, quietly joined the Orphans of the Vale shortly after the expedition. She left a single note before vanishing in 1925. The Fairmont mirror is not a reflection. It is a map. And some maps do not lead you to places, but to truths buried inside the people who think they are looking. There was no funeral, no body. But years later, in a locked drawer of her family estate, her nephew found a torn photograph. A woman, veiled, standing inside the same Fairmont room. But this time the mirror was whole, uncracked, shining. And in its reflection, not the woman, but a hallway made of books. The hallway of books was not part of the Fairmont estate. Architects confirmed it. Blueprints denied it. Even the foundation plans from 1852 made no allowance for a subterranean wing. But Isabella's final notes, the fragments recovered from burnt journals, musical scores, and torn sermon pages, spoke of a library beneath memory, not built of stone, built of belief. According to Whitlock's decrypted files, this place wasn't accessed with keys or doors. It was entered when a pattern was repeated enough times to fracture reality. They called it the threshold ritual. Not a séance, not magic. Something colder, a system, a process, a convergence of language, repetition, and loss. And in this underground archive, Isabella claimed the most dangerous texts were not books, but voices. Testimonies whispered into wax cylinders. Songs never written down, but passed from tongue to tongue among women who had been erased. Each file, a life. Each life, a proof. And those who heard them too clearly, they didn't go mad. They went invisible. Not gone, but imperceptible to those still anchored to the surface version of truth. That was Isabella's fate. Not death. Unwitnessing. The archive erased her from the story, because she had learned how the story was written. And the women who followed her, the veiled librarians, as they were later called, operated without time. They moved between places forgotten by history, cataloguing the things men tried to silence. Beneath every orphanage, every nunnery, every estate with a locked room or bricked corridor, they found echoes of her system. In 1933, an anonymous letter arrived at the Vatican's Apostolic Archive. Inside was a single phrase, written in blood. She remembers. No signature, just coordinates. To a convent in Vermont, long abandoned. And in its cellar, hidden behind a wall of hymnals, they found a mirror, or not a reflection, a door. Across the surface were dozens of names, not of saints, but of women who vanished between 1850 and 1900. Isabella's name was there, but scratched out, and beneath it, in an older hand, she speaks through the forgotten. They tried to seal the convent, tried to destroy the door, but mirrors are not so easily buried. By 1941, something strange began to ripple through the intelligence community. In the Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, a classified internal memo circulated under the heading Non-Euclidean Ritual Systems in New England. It made no sense at first, but buried deep in its annex was a familiar name, Isabella Fairmont. What did a disgraced 19th century socialite have to do with wartime counterintelligence? Everything. Because while Europe descended into chaos, American analysts grew obsessed with one unlikely question. Could belief alter perception so severely it became a weapon? They weren't talking about propaganda. They were talking about mirror systems. Not glass, conceptual mirrors. Rituals designed to fold truth in on itself, erase witnesses, bury memory, fabricate normalcy over trauma like plaster over rot. In short, psychological architectures. And according to declassified post-war reports, Isabella Fairmont had predicted all of it. In one passage, reconstructed from charred vellum hidden in a convent cellar, she writes, "A nation that forgets its women will breed men without memory, and when memory is lost, the gate opens. The gate." It kept appearing. CIA archivists began calling it the threshold event. Some speculated it had already occurred, that Isabella had triggered it in 1879, but its effects were slow, generational, creeping. They referenced children born blind, but able to describe colors no one taught them. Girls who hummed lullabies in extinct languages. Boys who screamed at mirrors because they saw someone else screaming back. And always, always, the recurrence of the word vestige. It was found carved into school desks in West Virginia, sewn into the hems of dresses in Kansas, inscribed on a silver pendant recovered from the bottom of a drained lake near Millbrook, Kentucky, where 43 graves had been found behind a former inn run by women. Same handwriting, same sigil. The orphans of the Vale were not a relic. They were expanding, training operatives, recruiting from the forgotten, teaching them to read silence like a scripture, to find meaning in absences, patterns and losses passed down through blood, not books. In 1947, the CIA blacklisted a single codename in red ink, the librarian. Not a spy, not a terrorist, a curator of the invisible, and her file, removed from archives in 1952. But a carbon copy was found, buried beneath the floorboards of a burned-down school. Here is Section 13. We uncover the child who remembered everything. Spoken text only, 400 words. Section 13. In 1958, a boy named Elias Keene was born in a shuttered mining town just outside of Ashford Hollow, Virginia. No birth certificate, no baptism, no known mother. Locals said he simply appeared, wrapped in a linen cloth with the word vestige embroidered across the chest. By age 4, Elias could read Latin, Aramaic, and a dialect of French last spoken in the 14th century. By 6, he had memorized the Book of Lamentations in 3 translations. But it wasn't what he knew that frightened people. It was what he remembered. Elias could describe, in perfect detail, events he had never witnessed. Conversations between long-dead nuns. The final confession of Isabella Fairmont, word for word. Even the coordinates of burial sites no one had ever found. He called them memory shards. When interrogated by researchers posing as child psychologists, he told them, "I was left behind to witness the forgotten." They institutionalized him by age 7, but not before he gave them something they couldn't explain. A map, hand-drawn, circular, carved into a wooden floor with nothing but a sharpened spoon. It showed a spiral. At each loop of the spiral, a name, not towns, not people, events. 79. The Vanishing of Isabella Fairmont, 1913. The Song That Made Children Sleepwalk, 1933. The Blood Mirror at the Vermont Convent, 1947. The Librarian's Code Redaction, 1958. He arrives remembering. And at the center of the spiral, one word. Threshold. Elias would go silent for years. But every August 9th, the date Isabella vanished, he'd repeat one sentence. She was never erased. She reversed. The doctors dismissed it as trauma looping. But years later, when a former CIA archivist traced the boy's carvings to a medieval encryption pattern used by Thyrsis, Valed librarians, they realized what Elias had done. He had encoded locations, sites of dimensional bleed, places where memory becomes unstable and silence carries the voices of the buried. In 1973, Elias escaped the facility. The only thing left behind was a mural painted across his room's wall. It showed a woman in mourning dress standing before a shattered mirror. Behind her, dozens of veiled women holding keys. Below the painting, one sentence, "We are not what you forget. We are what forgets you." In 1981, a Vatican courier named Father Leontius disappeared en route to a classified theological conference in Rome. But months later, a package bearing his seal arrived in Newport, Rhode Island, addressed to a defunct historical society that hadn't operated since 1903. Inside the box, a single wax-sealed tome bound in human hide. And a letter. It read, "For the custodian of the American heresies, may this reach you before the Archivum Obscura recovers it." The tome was known in whispers among the Jesuits as the Index Maleficorum, Volume 4, a forbidden catalogue of spiritual anomalies too dangerous for canon debate. Among its pages was an entry dated 1879. Case of the Lost Bride, Lady Isabella Fairmont, presumed absorbed. Presumed absorbed. The term was used rarely, only in reference to saints who disappeared in states of ecstatic vision, or those who, during rituals of inversion, had crossed into spiritual dimensions from which they never returned. But Isabella Fairmont had never been canonized. She had been condemned. So why was she listed among the transfigured? The entry offered one clue. Her memory remains locative, not metaphor, literal. The church believed that wherever Isabella had been, her memory had taken root, as a place, not a thought. A kind of sentient geography, and it was spreading. Father Leontius's notes, scribbled in the margins, were even more alarming. Vestige is no longer symbolic. It's operational. These women were not erased. They were archived into living reliquaries. Reliquaries, vessels for sacred fragments. The orphans of the Veil, it seemed, were more than survivors. They were keepers, not of relics, but of memory systems so ancient and untraceable they predated Christian liturgy itself. They didn't forget. They absorbed. Every trauma, every loss, every woman erased by power, taken into them like incense into cloth. And Isabella? She was their prototype, their Eve. The index warned, "Where memory congeals, time will fracture. Beware the places where names echo in absence." The church had sealed off over 13 such sites across the American South. Old convents, abandoned girls' schools, flooded orphanages. But the map left by Elias Keene showed 37, and one, circled in red, sat beneath Newport itself. A chamber beneath the ruins of a home long demolished, the place where Isabella was last seen, and possibly where she still is. In the spring of 1984, a private excavation team operating under the alias Boreas Restoration Group arrived in Newport under cover of night. They claimed to be conducting soil integrity tests for future coastal development. But in truth, they were hired by an unlisted Vatican sub-office known only as Domus Angelorum, the House of Angels, a unit that hadn't appeared in any papal ledger since 1891. Their target? The sub-basement of the long-demolished Fairmont estate, Isabella's childhood home. Coordinates matched those circled in red on Elias Keene's map. What they found wasn't just buried stone or rotten timber. It was a sealed chamber. No door, no hinges, just a hexagonal slab covered in carvings, not in Latin or Hebrew, but something older, pre-Akkadian, like memory etched in script. They drilled for 72 hours. On the third night, the slab cracked open, not inward but upward, as if something beneath had been waiting. Inside, a spiral staircase made of fused bone and marble, descending into perfect dark. They descended with fiber optic cables and infrared. What they found inside was not a basement. It was a theatre. Tiered seating, an altar at center, and along the curved walls, portraits, 47 of them. All women, all painted in mourning dress, each with their mouths sewn shut in red thread, but their eyes wide open, almost alive. And above the altar hung a tapestry that had no artist, no seams. It pulsed when approached. Images appeared and vanished. Not drawings, but memories, fading in and out like distant radio stations. Isabella's voice could be heard in fragments. They did not find me. They joined me. One team member, a seminary dropout named Aldrich Mize, lost consciousness while staring into the tapestry. When he awoke, he wept and whispered for hours, repeating one phrase: "The archive breathes. The Archie." The waits. They tried to reseal the chamber, but within 3 days, every member of the team either vanished or suffered psychotic collapse. Domus Angelorum burned their records and abandoned the site. But not before collecting a single artifact, a child's ribbon, still red, still stained. On it, embroidered in a woman's hand, August 9th, 1879, I remember. What was buried beneath Newport was not simply a girl's past. It was a reactivated memory structure, an altar of remembrance built to contain the forgotten. And now, it was awakening. In late autumn of 1984, the locals began reporting strange phenomena across Newport. Not ghosts, not sounds, but overlaps. A woman stepping out of her home on Elm Street saw her front yard replaced by a sepia-toned garden she didn't recognize, complete with gas lamps and a cobblestone path. It vanished seconds later. Children walking past the old convent near Hope Avenue said they heard music, a slow waltz on phonograph, and smelled perfume from a century ago. A mailman delivering packages near the Fairmont ruins swore he saw a woman in mourning dress standing behind a hedge. When he blinked, she was gone, but the hedge was still wet, as if someone had just passed through it. These weren't hauntings. They were leaks. Ruptures in chronology, the result of memory breaking through time's membrane. And the epicenter was clear. That buried chamber, the reliquary of the orphans, was no longer inert. It was broadcasting, but not signals, stories. Each anomaly was an unresolved narrative, bleeding back into the present, not as fictions, but as warnings. By winter, the air around the excavation site turned thick, difficult to breathe. Birds stopped nesting nearby. Dogs howled at night facing walls. The city quietly rerouted traffic. But underneath the bureaucracy, panic brewed. Then came the disappearances, a young teacher, a court clerk, 2 elderly sisters. All women. None found. One child survivor, a 9-year-old named Mara, was discovered in her family's attic after vanishing for 3 days. When authorities found her, she was humming a 19th-century lullaby no one had taught her. In her hand was a photograph of Lady Isabella Fairmont. She had drawn a red ribbon around the woman's neck and labelled her Mother of the Remembering. Mara said only one thing before going silent for months. She's opening the book. What book? The girls wouldn't say. But in the days that followed, 17 separate witnesses across Newport claimed they saw writing appear in the sky at dusk, faint, white, vanishing in seconds. The phrase, "She remembers us all." It was clear now. This wasn't haunting. This was activation. The archive, living, female, buried and betrayed, was no longer dormant. And something inside it had chosen to awaken. Long before her disappearance, Lady Isabella Fairmont began writing a manuscript. Not a memoir, not a confession, but a gospel. She called it the Memory Doctrine. Bound in black calfskin, no publisher, no title on the spine, only a sigil, 2 serpents forming an ouroboros around a keyhole. Her father forbade her from working on it after dark. He claimed it gave her nosebleeds, night terrors, and waking trances. Servants said they saw her writing for hours with her eyes closed. One maid insisted Isabella once dictated passages aloud, not in English, but in a forgotten tongue that caused nosebleeds in listeners. The manuscript vanished after her disappearance in 1879, but fragments resurfaced in 1947 in a private collection held by an American senator with ties to the Order of the Golden Dawn. Only 31 pages survived. And those pages changed people. A Yale professor assigned one passage to a graduate student in 1962. Within a month, the student was institutionalized, insisting he could hear the womb of the earth remembering. A Vatican archivist who handled the fragments claimed the text breathed when touched, as though its words responded to human memory. What did the memory doctrine teach? It spoke of reverse time, of trauma encoded into geography, of women who could store memory in matter, stone, skin, bone, like archival seeds. It told of the rememberers. An unbroken line of women stretching back before Rome, before Babylon, women entrusted with preserving pain, betrayal, injustice,
not to erase it, but to bind it, to transmute it into power. Isabella wrote that each rememberer must suffer isolation, accusation, and disappearance, because remembrance threatens empire, because power demands amnesia. The final lines of the fragment are burned at the edges, but what remains is chilling. When the world forgets, the veil thickens. Wow. And one remembers, it bleeds. But when many remember together, the sentence ends there, charred, like someone needed it unfinished. In 1986, an anonymous donor sent the Yale Baynek Library a sealed box. Inside, a red ribbon and one page, freshly written in Isabella's handwriting. It read, "The book was never lost. It lives in those who've seen behind the veil. And now it is being written again." The Fairmont name officially ended in 1912. That's what the records say. No heirs, no descendants, no lingering bloodline. But that was a lie. One arranged by powerful men who needed the blood to vanish, not because it was gone, but because it carried memory. Isabella had a daughter, born in secret in the spring of 1877, 2 years before the disappearance. No birth record, no baptism, no photographs. But her name appeared in a single ledger, inside the sealed medical journal of Dr. Edwin Brackett, the family's physician. In cramped, rushed handwriting, "Mother and child healthy. Child marked behind left ear. Same mole. Same eyes." Brackett's home burned down 3 weeks later. He and his wife died in the fire. His journals were recovered from a hidden compartment in the cellar. 1 week after the fire, a girl matching the child's description was adopted by a childless couple in Providence. The adoption papers were forged, confirmed by a handwriting analyst in 1978. This girl would grow up under a new name, Lenora Astin. She would attend Radcliffe College, become a midwife, and in 1904 found a women's retreat in the Berkshires for victims of societal hysteria. But it wasn't a retreat. It was a training ground. Lenora began to gather women who shared a peculiar trait. They remembered events they never lived. They spoke languages they were never taught. They drew maps of places they'd never been. And all of them bore the mark, a mole or crescent birthmark behind the left ear. They called themselves the Daughters of the Veil. And in private, they referred to Isabella not as a martyr, but as a signal, because something inside her had activated the blood, and it was contagious. By the 1920s, the group had quietly embedded themselves in nursing homes, orphanages, psychiatric wards, and female prisons, places where women were discarded, silenced, or erased, places where memory could hide. In 1931, a convent ledger in Rhode Island recorded a strange entry. Next to the name Lenora Astin, someone had written in red, "The doctrine is alive, and it dreams through us." The bloodline had not died. It had gone underground. A memory, breathing beneath the skin of America. Waiting. In 1952, the Fairmont estate in Newport was scheduled for demolition. The house had stood for nearly a century, rotting behind wrought iron gates, overgrown with vines, watched only by gulls and salt wind. But as the wrecking crew began their work, something unexpected happened. A local photographer named Vincent Halbrook, hired by the city to document the teardown, captured a series of images on black and white film. In 3 of the photographs, taken seconds apart, there appears a woman in a white dress standing at the top of the central staircase. Her eyes are obscured by shadow. Her mouth is slightly open. One hand is raised, not in greeting, but in warning. She vanishes in the next frame. The city dismissed it as a trick of the light. The negatives were quietly confiscated. Halbrook was found dead 6 days later, a fall from the roof of his apartment.
but a contact print survived. It resurfaced in 1971 in the possession of a Georgetown professor of folklore. He claimed the woman in the photo bore a disturbing anatomical correspondence to portraits of Isabella Fairmont. He also noted a peculiar architectural feature in the background, a door that had not been in any previous floor plans of the estate. A 17th door, painted black, brass knob, the number 3 engraved upside down. When demolition resumed, workers discovered a hidden basement room beneath where the door had stood. Inside were 3 items: a rusted cot with restraints on each limb, a wall of mirrors, all cracked down the center, a leather-bound book with no title, its pages blank, until touched. The book's ink rose from the paper when exposed to heat from human skin. And the first line that appeared? "If you see her, do not speak. Memory listens." The room was resealed, the house destroyed. The book vanished into the vaults of a private East Coast collection. But rumors persist that pieces of the house still exist, sold off in auctions, buried in antique stores, embedded in new homes. And wherever a piece of that house survives, so does she. The woman on the stairs, still walking, still waiting, still listening for someone who remembers. Someone like you. After the destruction of the Fairmont estate, an unusually large sum of money changed hands. It came from a dormant account in a European trust tied to the British Crown. The recipient, a newly established psychiatric institution just 20 miles inland, nestled in the woods outside Pawtucket. Marrow Glen, founded in 1953. Publicly, it served as a progressive center for the treatment of female psychological disassociation. Privately, it was something else entirely. Documents unearthed in a 1989 Freedom of Information leak revealed that Marrow Glen was funded, staffed, and overseen by a shell organization linked to MKUltra, the CIA's covert psychological operations program. But Marrow Glen didn't test drugs. It tested memory itself. According to a whistleblower's sworn affidavit, the women brought to Marrow Glen were not random. Many were descendants, not just biologically, but neurologically. Women with unbroken recall, uncanny intuition, or spontaneous linguistic shifts. All of them had something the government called residual echo phenomena, visions, flashbacks, whole ancestral experiences recalled with no trigger. It terrified the institutions. Because if memory could transmit through blood, if trauma could speak across generations, then history was no longer safe in the hands of the victors. The women were studied, broken, silenced. Some disappeared. Others were rendered catatonic. One woman, patient number 0431, managed to leave behind 36 pages of a diary smuggled out by a nurse. In it she writes, "They are trying to separate my mind from my time. They call it progress. But what they really want is a way to silence the dead. We remember things they paid to forget." Marrow Glen closed in 1972. Officially, it was due to budget cuts. Unofficially, it was burned to the ground by unknown arsonists the night after patient 0431 disappeared from her locked room. No remains were found. But in the ash, firefighters discovered something inexplicable: a brass doorknob, engraved with the number 3, upside down. The same doorknob from the hidden room beneath the Fairmont estate. It had survived both destruction and time, as if whatever waited behind it could not be killed. Marrow Glen is gone. But the women who survived it? They didn't forget. They became the keepers of memory, even when it cost them their names. They call themselves the Line. Not an organization, not a cult, a bloodline. A silent movement of women tied not by ideology, but by shared inheritance.
Every one of them descended from the original families of Newport, from the Fairmonts, the Duncans, the Wexlers, the Sedgwicks, and behind closed doors they whispered of something older than wealth, older than land, older even than law. A covenant made before America was born. One woman in the line, identified only as Mother Ilsa in a 1996 recovered audio tape, spoke of it in grave terms. They think they built this country on ideas. They didn't. They built it on forgetting. And we are the ones who remember. Their purpose is not activism. It is containment. Containment of something once opened. A ritual repeated every 13 years on the date of Isabella Fairmont's disappearance, October 3rd, in 3 separate places. A burial site beneath the original Newport town square, a submerged tunnel entrance under a retired lighthouse in Narragansett Bay, and a sealed chamber in the cellar of the abandoned St. Celestine Chapel, accessible only with a key believed to have belonged to Bishop Marlowe himself. Each site must be visited, each offering must be made, not to appease, but to bind. Because whatever came through Isabella in 1879 never fully left. The ritual, known only as the turning, involves the reading of a single name 3 times, not aloud, but in silence, with the heart, not the tongue. If done correctly, the walls hold. If done incorrectly, well, there are gaps. The last time the ritual failed, 1940, a fire tore through Newport's East District, officially blamed on faulty wiring. But the survivor testimonies mentioned things that defied explanation. Children speaking in dead languages, statues weeping salt, a woman in white at the edge of every flame. The line went underground, and after that, they no longer met in groups, no more ledgers, no more symbols. Just a phrase passed from mother to daughter. If you remember too clearly, you will go blind. But one woman broke that rule. In 2003, she wrote everything down, every ritual, every symbol, every blood name. She mailed it to a university archive under a pseudonym. The package was returned to sender, empty, and 3 nights later, she vanished. At 44 Blackroot Lane, just beyond Newport's historical district, stands a house no one built. It has no deed, no builder's record, and no foundation. Ask the city clerk, and they'll tell you it's not on the official maps, yet everyone knows it's there. Locals call it the coughing house, because no matter the season, the sound of a woman coughing echoes from inside its walls. No one lives there. No lights turn on. But the curtains shift, and on rare nights the front door creaks open, revealing a long hallway lined with mirrors, each one slightly delayed, as if the reflection is thinking before it moves. In 1982, a team of architecture students from Brown University attempted to investigate it for a thesis on liminal spaces. Only one made it out. His name was David Mercer. He refused to speak for 10 years. When he finally did, he left behind a single recorded message before walking into the Atlantic Ocean fully clothed. His final words, "It's not a house. It's a memory someone locked in wood." Inside that memory, David claimed to see a room with 43 clocks, all ticking in unison. Each clock marked the year of a woman's disappearance from Newport history, and above each, a photograph, scorched but visible. One photo stood out. A young woman with pearl earrings and a bleeding nose, eyes wide, mouth open as if mid-sentence. The nameplate read, Fairmont. No first name, no date, just Fairmont. When Mercer reached for the photo, the clock stopped. The walls shifted, and the house began to cough, not gently but violently, like it was trying to spit something out. He ran. He never went back. But others tried. A paranormal crew in 1997. A real estate developer in 2004. A journalist in 2016. None returned. Only their recordings made it out, garbled, staticky, filled with a single phrase repeated over and over. She never left. To this day, just the coffin house still stands. No vines grow on it. No rot spreads through the wood. It is timeless, untouched by decay, as if the house itself is being preserved by something beneath it. Not concrete, not stone, but an idea, an ancient one, that some truths are too heavy to bury, and they rise in the places we forget to look.
It was unsigned, unframed, hidden behind the false back of a drawer in the abandoned east wing of the Fairmont estate. A portrait, roughly 3 feet tall, painted in oils that shimmer strangely under candlelight, as if the canvas were still wet. And it wasn't found until 1978, almost 100 years after Isabella Fairmont vanished. The woman in the portrait is unmistakable. Same high cheekbones, same storm-dark eyes, same serpent-shaped locket around her throat. But the expression is what no one can explain, because it doesn't match the photographs. Isabella was known to be poised, demure, genteel, the embodiment of New England elegance. But in the painting, her lips are curled in a way that's almost cruel, her pupils dilated, her fingers, barely visible in the lower half of the frame, are twisted together, not in tension, but in delight. And at her feet, a small black shape. It might be a dog, might be a shadow, but some who've seen it insist they saw it move. One restorer in 1980 claimed the portrait repainted itself overnight. Another said the colors bled when left in a church. But the most unsettling detail, the one that no critic, no historian, no skeptic has been able to disprove, is this. The canvas is not stretched over wood. It's stretched over something organic. A forensic test was quietly run in 1992. The results were sealed, but a whistleblower from the lab leaked one sentence. Human dermal collagen, female, aged 19 to 21. That's precisely the age Isabella would have been when she vanished. No painter was ever identified. No diary or commission record has ever surfaced. And yet the brushwork is masterful, layered in a style used only by 4 known artists, all of whom were presumed dead by 1875. So the question isn't who painted it. The question is who stood still long enough to become it. Some believe the portrait is a seal, a prison, that whatever entered Isabella that night in 1879 was bound to the canvas by those who knew how to trap what cannot be killed. But others believe it's a beacon, a way back, a door. And that's why it's kept under lock and key now, deep in the restricted archives beneath a private wing of the Newport Art Society, guarded 24 hours a day, not for its value, but because it still breathes. They called it the Chapel of Divine Mercy, built in 1868 on the highest hill in Newport, a white-bricked sanctuary for the city's forgotten. Orphans, widows, outcasts, all were welcome. But beneath its altar, hidden behind iron-grated flooring and a centuries-old Latin inscription, lies a chamber that was never part of the church's original plans. It's not marked on any blueprint. Not even the clergy knew of its existence. Until the floor gave way in 1904. They were replacing the altar's foundation stone when a worker's foot broke through. Beneath it, a hollow, cold shaft descending 20 feet into darkness. At the bottom, they found a room. Circular, damp, walls covered in wax and smoke. A single stone table in the center, carved with 3 initials, I.F. Isabella Fairmont. No furniture, no scriptures. Just 47 deep grooves in the floor. Too uniform to be erosion, too purposeful to be dismissed. One priest fainted. Another fled the faith entirely. Because on the ceiling,
etched in reverse Latin, was a phrase that translated roughly to keep her still, she must remember. What does that mean? Scholars have debated it for decades. Some say the chamber was part of a forgotten exorcism rite, one not sanctioned by the Church, a rite that binds not by force but by memory. The theory goes like this. If the subject is dangerous, you don't remove them. You trap them in a cycle, a repeating loop of their last hours, a prison made not of walls but of self-recognition. But there's a catch. If the subject ever realizes the memory isn't real, if they ever wake up, the prison fails, and the presence returns. That might explain why the walls were covered in soot, why there were no doors, why, to this day, witnesses claim to hear soft weeping beneath the chapel floor, even though the room was sealed with consecrated stone in 1905. But it gets worse. In 1993, during renovations to modernize the chapel, they opened the floor again. The chamber was gone. No room, no table, just solid earth. And the stone slab with Isabella's initials? It was found embedded in the wall of the Fairmont estate, 2.4 miles away, freshly scorched, as if something walked it there, or was summoned. At precisely 12:07 a.m., on November the 3rd, 1879, 56 days after Isabella Fairmont vanished, a telegram was received at the Providence Telegraph Office. It bore no sender's name, no return address. But the message was short. Just 8 words. She is not lost. She is becoming us. The operator on duty, a man named Emery Cask, claimed the telegram came through as if on its own. No transmission signal, no Morse tapping. It simply appeared. Typed, clean, slightly warm to the touch. Cask reported it immediately, thought it was a prank, until the paper burned his fingertips an hour later. He left the job that night and was institutionalized within the week. His final journal entry, scrawled in feverish script, reads, "The message wasn't written. It was spoken into me." Of course, no official link was made to Isabella Fairmont, but a private investigator hired by the family, Thaddeus Lockmere, took a different view. Lockmere had a theory, one he never published, but whispered only to his brother in a letter dated December 7th. There's no abduction, no runaway romance. The girl was taken, but not by man. The telegram is not a warning. It's a declaration of completion. Lockmere believed the telegram was not meant for Providence. It was meant for someone inside the Fairmont circle, a signal, a final step. You see, 3 other telegrams arrived that same week, one in Salem, one in Baltimore, and one in London, each with different variations of the same message. She is no longer hers. The circle is full. We are within the maiden. No dates, no stamps, each line like a riddle sent from a mouth without a body. But it's what happened next that terrified even the skeptics. Every recipient, all unrelated, all living in separate cities, was found dead within 3 days. No signs of trauma, no poison in the blood, but all of them were disc-overed, smiling, frozen in the same position, heads tilted to the right, lips curled faintly upward, arms crossed over the chest, as if resting in perfect peace. Some say the telegrams were invitations, or worse, infections, because the one sent to Providence, it was never recovered. The page was stolen from the archives in 1986, and the only known copy was found nailed to the inside of a mirror. They kept it covered for decades. A simple brass-framed mirror, 3 feet tall, found in room 313 of the Whitby Hotel. A modest place with only one curious distinction. That room had been sealed shut since 1881. The staff never spoke of it. No bookings were ever made for it. No keys were issued. And yet, twice a year, always on the spring and autumn equinox,
Someone reported seeing a woman in black standing at its window, staring out across the city, her reflection never visible. The mirror itself was discovered in 1927 when a wall was torn down during renovations. Behind it, not a room, but a chamber made of brick, barely large enough to stand in. Inside, the mirror was bolted to the wall, and on its surface, scratched in reverse script, "What I am, I was made to be." An inspector tried to remove it. He lasted 12 minutes. Witnesses say he began muttering phrases in a language no one understood, not Latin, not German, not Aramaic. He collapsed shortly after, eyes wide open, blood trickling from his ears. He was pronounced dead on arrival. His death certificate lists the cause as neurological rupture due to sustained auditory hallucination. But the coroner had one more note. He had carved a single letter into his palm with a thumbnail before he died. I. They covered the mirror again. Concrete was poured, and for 41 years, room 313 remained quiet, until the floor above collapsed in 1968, revealing the mirror again. This time, it had changed. The inscription was gone, and in its place, a telegram, nailed to the glass from the inside. Same paper, same font. Only this time, a new message. I remember now, and I am ready. By the time authorities arrived, the mirror was shattered. Not broken into shards, but atomized, as if exposed to an internal explosion of pressure or heat. No sound had been heard, no fire had been seen, and yet, but the air in the room was 19 degrees colder than the rest of the building. The entire wing was sealed, the bricks replaced. But staff say, if you stand on the third floor after midnight, especially on the autumn equinox, you can still see your reflection in the window where the mirror once hung. Only it's not you. It's a woman, and she's not smiling. She's watching. He reappeared on a fog-drenched morning in 1883, 4 years after his daughter vanished, 2 years after being declared legally dead, and 11 months after his estate had been sold to settle mounting debts. Samuel Fairmont walked into Newport's Christ Redeemer parish at dawn. Shoeless, silent, eyes bloodshot, hair greyer than when he left, skin tight over bone like dried paper, and in his arms, a small wooden box, cradled as if it were a child. Witnesses recall how he stood motionless in the nave for nearly an hour, lips trembling, gaze fixed on the crucifix above the altar, before finally whispering something to the priest. Father Leon's statement was recorded in the church's private register, not the public one. The entry has been preserved, and it reads, he said, "She has returned to me, but not as she was, not as anyone should be." He handed the box to the priest and left. Not a word more, not a glance backward, just walked into the mist that rolled in off the harbour and was never seen again. But the box was real. Locked with a mechanism unlike anything local locksmiths could open. No keyhole, no latch, just a spiral carved into the lid, like a maze that never ends. When finally forced open weeks later, they expected remains, or maybe Isabella's possessions. Instead, they found hair, human, long, black, braided, and beneath it, a single yellowed photograph, faded by time, but unmistakable in its detail. A girl, Isabella, seated at a piano. But the hands on the keys were not hers. Too long, wrong angle, 7 fingers on each. And behind her, in the dark reflection of the parlour window, a shape no one could explain. Tall, gaunt, hollow eyes, and a grin that touched the corners of the glass.
The photograph has never been authenticated, but the man who developed it, Elias Wren, the parish caretaker, went blind 2 days after viewing it. No trauma, no illness, just darkness. He later confessed in a letter, "I did not see a girl at all. I saw a mouth, and it opened when I blinked." The box has never been found again. It disappeared from the church vault in 1891. But every now and then, strands of black hair appear in pews where no one sat.
There was a book, kept hidden beneath the floorboards of the Newport town hall since 1856, not a census record, not a property deed. A ledger, handwritten, bound in leather, made not from cowhide, but something thinner, smoother, almost translucent. It catalogued names, but not of citizens. These were initiates, pages upon pages of entries, each with a name, a date, and one of 2 outcomes written in crimson ink: turned, unfit. This ledger was not meant for government use. It belonged to the Newport Society for Anatomical Correction, a private, invitation-only fellowship of elite families, including Fairmont, Whitmore, Ashbury, and Bellamy, all of whom vanished from public life between 1875 and 1887. They called it the Renewal Project. According to the surviving pages, these families believed the human body was not the end point of evolution, but merely a vessel, crude, limited, easily overcome. Their goal was to prepare the chosen for what they called the second inhabitation. No one knows what that meant, but the descriptions in the ledger are haunting. By the name of each initiate were notations like bone shortening successful, ocular dilation stable, nasal collapse in progress, no vocal responses, promising, rejection event, subject expired, interior organs reversed. Of the 118 names in the book, 43 were labelled turned. The rest were deemed failures, or vanished. And here's the part history doesn't want whispered. Each turned initiate was assigned a caretaker, whose name was blacked out with an oil-based pigment that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. One page simply read, "Sustained contact beyond 66 minutes results in transference. Do not observe them in mirrors. Do not record their names aloud." The final entry in the ledger was dated November the 2nd, 1879. Next to it was a line of script in a different hand. "I do not forget, they do not forgive, and they do not die." The ledger was uncovered in 1964 during renovation. It was removed, photographed, studied, and then lost. But one archivist kept a single page, tucked into the lining of her coat. It now resides in a safety deposit box under lock and key. The name at the top of the page, Isabella Fairmont. And beside it, in crimson, turned, mirror silent, retains memory. Awaiting return. In 1885, a sealed envelope arrived at the home of Dr. Cornelius Bellamy, one of the last surviving members of the Newport Society. He had long since retreated into silence, having shuttered his medical practice and refused visitors. The envelope was unsigned, the handwriting unfamiliar, but the contents were unmistakable. A single sentence written in deep red ink. "She is not alone, and she remembers what you did." Dr. Bellamy collapsed that evening. According to his housemaid, he spent the night feverish and muttering in Latin, though he had never studied the language. His final words before falling unconscious were whispered between clenched teeth. "I saw the mouth open. I saw the tongue was bone." He awoke just long enough to write a letter. The Bellamy letter. It was addressed to no one. Left unsealed on his desk, stained with what appeared to be blood. But no matter how many times archivists have tested it, it refuses to oxidize. It remains wet. Always. The letter reads like a confession, or a curse. "We made a contract. We offered our daughters and our bloodlines to those who wait beneath the hall,
and in return they gave us knowledge. They unstitched the skin of the world for us and showed us what writhes beneath it. We called them angels. We called them physicians. But they are not here to heal. They are here to replace. Bellamy admits to attending what he calls a reversal ceremony, the final stage of the renewal process. He described it as a moment of internal exile, when the soul is gently turned outward like a glove and something else is placed inside. He does not name Isabella Fairmont, but he references the girl who would not bend and claims she became the first to return with memory intact. He ends the letter with this line: "We thought we could control the new flesh, but it remembers the old, and it hates us for what we did." Within days, Bellamy was dead. His body was found inverted, literally reversed, bones facing outward, organs in the wrong place, the mouth sewn shut from the inside. The coroner's report was never released. The Bellamy letter remains stored in the Rhode Island Historical Vault, sealed in 3 layers of glass, because attempts to incinerate it have failed. The blood still won't dry.
On January 11th, 1887, in the heart of a brutal New England winter, 5 women arrived in Newport unannounced. They travelled by private rail, no tickets, no luggage, and no names. Witnesses described them as wearing identical black veils, woven so tightly that even their breath didn't escape. They stepped off the train just after dusk, snow falling hard. Their shoes made no sound on the platform. No one greeted them. No carriage waited. Yet they walked, as if pulled by some invisible thread, straight to the old Whitmore estate, which had been abandoned for nearly a decade, shuttered since the last of the Fairmont heirs vanished. What happened next is folklore, and rumour, and something darker. Because no official record of their arrival exists. The conductor who swore he saw them later retracted his statement, or had it retracted for him. But there is one piece of evidence that remains. A photograph taken by a 12-year-old apprentice named Leo Gardner, whose father ran the town's photography shop. It was meant to be a snow study, a boy's experiment in exposure. Instead, it captured 5 figures crossing the Whitmore threshold, shrouded in black, with no visible hands or feet. The image has been examined hundreds of times. The veils, not fabric. The resolution, impossible for the era. And most disturbing of all, behind the 5th woman, barely visible, is a 6th figure. Much smaller, child-sized, but not walking, hanging, as if suspended in the air, head bowed backward, arms folded behind her like broken wings. That night, the lights in the Whitmore house flickered on for the first time in 9 years. They burned for exactly 1 hour. Then nothing. By dawn, the veiled women were gone. No footprints in the snow, no carriage tracks, no witnesses. But a funeral was held that afternoon. Only the town priest attended. He was found weeping in the chapel vestibule, whispering, "We buried her, but she wasn't dead." There is no grave marker, no obituary, no church records. But the following Sunday, the bell in the chapel rang 6 times. Then shattered. The priest never spoke again, and the families tied to the Newport Society, the Whitmores, the Ashburys, the Bellamys, ceased to exist. By spring, their homes were empty, and the town finally understood. The line had ended, but the memory hadn't. By 1890, the Ashbury Hotel had become a haunted shell, the kind of place children dared each other to enter and adults pretended to forget. But it wasn't always that way. Built in 1842 by Elias Ashbury, distant cousin to the Whitmores, the hotel was considered a masterpiece of refinement. It hosted senators, scholars, and secret societies. Its 6th room, on the 2nd floor, was reserved only for initiation guests. And then one day, it was sealed.
Room 6 was closed off in 1863 without explanation. The doors were bolted from the outside, the windows nailed shut. No staff were allowed near it, and any guest who asked about it was politely asked to leave. For decades, the room remained untouched. Until 1890, when a fire inspector named Victor Sloane was sent to assess the structure for demolition. Sloane was thorough and stubborn. When he reached the second floor and found room 6 nailed shut, he pried it open. He never made it to the hallway again. His partner, waiting downstairs, heard the door creak, then a single wet thud, like something dropped from a great height, but the floor above didn't shake. When authorities finally forced the door, the room was different. There was no furniture, no wallpaper, only a massive circular seal carved into the floor, 12 feet across, etched with symbols no one recognized. In the center, a deep pit, bricked in like a well, and beside it, something wrapped in oilcloth. It was Sloane. Except it wasn't. His body was intact. No injuries. But the coroner reported that his lungs had been removed from the inside and replaced with fine, fibrous threads, almost like silk, but alive, still twitching, still pulsing. Most horrifying of all, Sloane's lips had been sewn shut from within, just like Dr. Bellamy's years earlier. That room was never reopened, but local children say they can still hear breathing from it. Aside, but it doesn't inhale, only exhales, constantly, as if it's trying to cool something, or someone. The Ashbury Hotel was demolished in 1893. But when the wrecking crew began with room 6, every single pickaxe and hammer shattered on contact with the floor's seal. So they built the foundation around it instead. And if you visit the site today, buried beneath a city parking lot, there's one spot where the asphalt never freezes. Even in January, the letter arrived in spring. No return address, no stamp, just a blood-red seal pressed with the same unknown sigil found beneath room 6. It was addressed to Dr. Elijah Grange, the last living member of the Ashford family. By then, Grange was in seclusion, reportedly half-mad, half-blind, and completely estranged from society. He had spent the last 30 years writing a manuscript that no one was allowed to read. But this letter changed everything. Inside was a single line. The child is alive, and she has returned. No one knows who wrote it. No one ever saw the courier. But 3 days later, Grange was seen boarding a train headed west. Alone, carrying only a worn satchel and a child's dress, hand-stitched in the Ashford family pattern, a weave band after the incident at St. Agatha's. Witnesses say he looked rejuvenated, alert, determined. What happened after that is buried in shadows. But one log remains, torn from a burnt journal discovered in a New Mexico mission nearly 40 years later. A single passage survived the fire. Grange's handwriting, shaky, desperate. She is not a child, not anymore. She speaks with my mother's voice, and dreams in a language I can't remember but somehow obey. Her eyes, God, her eyes, they do not blink. They only widen. She says the name I buried, the name I swore never to utter again. Bellamy. The line is not dead. It has only changed direction. The next day, the mission was abandoned. Every candle extinguished. Every cross turned upside down. And Grange? Never seen again. But once a year on the night of the Ashford eclipse, the same celestial alignment that occurred during the disappearance of the Whitmore Socialite, a young girl arrives at the mission's ruins. She wears a black veil, carries no luggage, and sings a song no language can translate. Locals call her the Return. But they don't go near, because the ruins are not empty. There is a voice there, not loud, just constant, like a whisper boiling up from the ground. And when people ask who she is, what she wants, she stops singing and smiles. I'm the part you forgot. I'm the chapter you skipped. I'm the daughter of what you buried. And I remember everything.